Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. It is Wednesday the 2nd. It feels like we have been stuck in the same perpetual same month for a year and a half, so I'm not sure why I even give you the date anymore. Joined today, of course, by my co-host Sam.
Oh my eye! Who put that barbed wire there? Sorry, I gotta point out the cool VBV logo we've got going on. Also, my head fits perfectly between the little barbs.
You might have to tilt a little bit, right?
I don't know how to use this thing.
Also joined by today's very special guest, Tim Waggoner. How are you, Tim?
Oh, great. How you guys doing?
Can't complain here. I mean, yes, I can complain because I always complain, but I'm awesome.
I am doing well. It's been kind of a dreary day, but that's okay. I got lots of stuff indoors done I needed to get done. Tim, you are a guy who, for the last several decades, has been working in the horror genre, producing stories for novels, short stories in a variety of genres. You've also worked in nonfiction. You've been a guiding light for other writers, providing a lot of nonfiction essays that help to steer writers away from some of the common pitfalls and towards, hopefully, a little bit of creative freedom inside a field that is probably at one of the most challenging points it's ever been. First off, let's start with where we always start. How'd you get bit by the horror bug? What was the inciting incident?
Oh, it's really hard to say. I mean, probably my earliest memories of even just being excited about reading was when I was, I don't know, 3 or 4, and I would sit on my dad's lap and he would read like dinosaur books he'd get out of the library. And I couldn't read yet. I didn't know letters yet, but he went over these things so often that I could recognize their names by the shape of their names. And once I learned to read, I couldn't do that anymore. But I was so excited and fascinated by the idea that these things were real once upon a time. You know, they were all around, but you couldn't see them anymore. They're gone. They were dead. So they were kind of like living monster ghosts, sort of. And I just, from that moment on, I was just fascinated with horror.
I think dinosaurs are a really common place to start, as well as the cryptids, the Bigfoots and the Loch Ness monsters. So you start to read at, I imagine, a fairly young age. That seems to be a kind of common theme with most writers. What are the first novels that you come across that start to steer you in the direction of the genre as well?
Well, the first novel I remember reading, first couple, the very first one I think was The Spaceship Under the Apple Tree, which is about some alien that come and visit some kid. And I just remember it because I thought it'd be so cool to have an alien friend. And then there was one, I think it was called The Enormous Egg. And this was like written in the 60s, but the whole idea was that chickens were birds were related to dinosaurs. And so there was some kind of throwback where a chicken egg hatched a Tyrannosaurus. Not Tyrannosaurus, a Triceratops. And it wasn't until Jurassic Park came out and they started talking about birds and dinosaurs. I was like, oh my God, I read this book when I was a kid. And they made a movie out of it, or at least like a Saturday morning special or something. I was fascinated by it wasn't a cartoon, it was real live. So I was fascinated by the Triceratops going around and knocking over milk trucks and stuff. So those are the two that I remember the most, probably. Then when I was 5, there was this book by the same guy who did Clifford the Big Red Dog, Nelson Bridwell, and it was called How to Care for Your Monster. And it was supposed to be like, like How to Care for Your Puppy, but except it was monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein. And I was fascinated by this book. I traded like my best baseball cards to some kid for it. As many as I didn't care. I had to have that book. So those are the 3 that I remember the most early on.
Do you remember any monster care tips that were in that book by chance?
Oh, yeah, there were all kinds. Yeah, there were some of them were like kind of normal ones adapted, like, your werewolf will be scared by fireworks on 4th of July, which happens to real dogs. You have to go ahead and make sure that you keep the stitching on your Frankenstein's monster, nice and tight, and your mummy well wrapped. And they also had to stick, I forget what they told you to do. It might have been just evergreen branches inside to keep him fresh, like you'd stick it inside the bandages. They had all kinds of little things like that.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to think about that anytime I have like a serious wound that I need to wrap. Like, do I need some evergreen branches on this?
That's right.
Maybe it causes an infection. I'm not sure. Don't stick random plants in your wounds, guys. It's gross.
It's probably good advice.
Not random ones. So to this day, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
No. When I was a kid, it was the Tyrannosaurus, probably Stegosaurus for a while. I also remember reading some books as a kid about some kid in Arizona who found a Stegosaurus living like in a canyon, and the Stegosaurus talked. So it was like the best of both worlds. You had a Stegosaurus and it talked. I just thought Stegosauruses looked pretty cool. But now, no, I'm actually fascinated to learn more about what they think they really look like now that they know that they probably had feathers on them and stuff like that. So one of my action figures over here is like a dinosaur with all the feathers on it.
That's so cute. Can I get your opinion on, okay, maybe this is divisive, and I'm sorry ahead of time, chat, but thoughts on the Ankylosaurus? Because it's kind of like, that's my go-to dinosaur, and it's just sort of like a dark horse, I think. It's got the little crowned head and the little armored back and the little tail with the little balls on it. And I feel like it's kind of underrated dinosaur-wise.
I always thought it was pretty cool because it was like a tank. It looked like nothing could bite into it, and then with that big tail, it could just like crush a skull.
Yeah.
And so I always imagine those as the ones that would just walk around and everybody would leave alone.
Yeah, those the ones with the bald heads are also very cool. The ones that ram into each other.
Yeah,
but I can't think of that name.
Anything with a bald head is cool. That's so.
That needs to be your Halloween costume, Lauren.
That would take a little bit of work, but I'm up for a challenge.
There you go.
So, at what point do you decide that writing is the way that your life is going to go?
I've been making up stories all my life, whether it was kind of, on the playground saying, "Ooh, let's do this and let's do that." And, you cite circumstances and then you play like, I remember playing Iron Man way back when Iron Man was still like a D-list or Marvel character. I don't even know why the hell we were doing it. But, and I would draw things. I wanted to be an artist, a comic book artist at one point. And I made my own little comic book and wrote it only so I had something to draw. And my friends used to tease me about how bad the art was, but how much they liked the stories. And I was so mad because I didn't give a damn about the stories. All I wanted was to do this art. But eventually, the more I tried to become a good artist, the more I realized how slow it was communicating something. And I could communicate things with words so much faster. And then when I was maybe a junior in high school, I read an interview with Stephen King back probably right after The Shining was published. So he wasn't super famous. So he was in this Dracula Lives magazine that Marvel put out. The picture has him with vampire fangs, the fake plastic ones. And in there, when I read the interview, I remember it was the first time that it occurred to me. I mean, I knew people wrote stories, they wrote books, but it never occurred to me that it was something a person could choose to do. And so I was down in my bedroom reading it, and I just kind of closed the magazine and walked down the hall, down to the family room. My mom was there, and I said, "Mom, I think I might like to be a writer." And she just looked at me and said, "I think you'd be a good one." And so that was the moment where I thought about, it's something I could choose and I could put effort toward and work toward.
So what is the first sale, and what does that feel like?
So when you say first sale, do you mean first pro, or first what?
However you want to answer, but I'd like the first. I mean, mine was Xeroxed and unreadable, but
sounds almost like a title, Xeroxed and unreadable.
We should work on that.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
I think it was a story that I wrote it for creative writing. The only creative writing class my high school ever had was probably 16. And I ripped off a story from an old Erie Comics magazine. They had a story about Santa and all the elves were dead, and there was one last Christmas elf. But it was like a Tales from the Crypt story. The Christmas elf came and killed these kids' abusive dad or whatever, then flew away on a sleigh. And I'm like, the idea of the last Christmas elf is awesome, but that was a terrible story. So, I wrote it. I called it The Last Christmas Present, and it was about an elf. And at the end, he sacrifices his life to push a kid out of the way of a car. And so, they're all gone now. Santa's gone. The elves are gone. But so I wrote this thing. The teacher loved it. She wanted to read it to the class, and she said, though, she didn't want to embarrass whoever it was because she didn't, ask ahead of time. So she didn't say the name, and I didn't say it was me. But eventually, some local little like weekly paper got a hold of it, and they published it, and they interviewed me. And and I put on my suit to go to the interview. I had to go to the journalist's house, which you would not do these days.
No, not at all.
Even if you're 16, you wouldn't send your 16-year-old to the journalist's house. But she interviewed me, and I was in my suit, and it came out and everything. And so I count that as the first publication, really, since it was.
Seeing your name in print with your work under it.
Mm-hmm.
Was that contagious? Was that something you could ever walk back from?
It's odd because I still will look at something that's been published and I'll look at my name on it. It's almost unreal still. It's like trying to, sometimes there's a long time between the time you create it and the time it's out, and you've either forgotten writing it. There are a couple stories that they're still not out that I don't even know what they are. I know I wrote them. I know they're coming, but for the life of me, can't remember what the hell it was about. So yeah, I mean, it never gets old. That's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it still has that quality of just, childlike play in a matter.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does feel like that.
Yeah, just coming up with things out of your imagination, and then somehow people keep sending you money for it.
Yes. That's the best part. That people don't know you do it for free.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. That is the best part. Yep.
And I'll take whatever money the world wants to throw at me, but I'm not too money motivated. As long as I have enough, just to, for the basics.
Yeah, I think most of us are. I think a lot of creative types are like that too.
Yeah.
Was there a particular publication or any of your work, whether it's a novel or a nonfiction piece, whatever, that particularly still resonates as the most meaningful for you?
Probably a short story I wrote called Mr. Punch, because it was I wrote it. I was probably 28 or 29. And it was the first time I wrote a story that it was like the weird kind of stuff I write now. I mean, I just kind of did my own thing for the first time without worrying about anybody else or what anybody thought of it. I sent it off to my critique partner back in the days before email. So I sent it off in street mail. And then I read it to my writers group, which had a couple professional writers in it. And Dennis L. McKiernan, a fantasy writer, and Lois McMaster Bujol was part of it for a while too. And I read it to them and they loved it except for the ending. And the ending was so surreal and symbolic. And I tried to rewrite it the way that they thought. And, I said, fuck it, this story is my story. And there was an anthology called Youngblood. And the whole conceit of it was that the stories had to have been written before the author was 30. And so they had a Stephen King story in there and an Edgar Allan Poe story, but they were, and I think Ramsey Campbell, but they were all produced before they were 30. And so I thought, thinking market wise, I'm like, well, okay, I'm not going to be up against super professionals at this point. So I got a shot. And so I sent it and they accepted it and it got published. And, Ellen Datlow chose it for one of the honorable mentions in that year's best horror, in fantasy and best horror at that time. And then after all that, my friend sent my critique partner, sent it back, the story, the printout, and it was read everywhere. He marked all kinds of stuff on it. And I said, I'm not so sure I really need the critique anymore from people. Not like that. And I've never looked back. But it was that story. It was weird too, because I was doing a little small writer's workshop at a conference, and Gary Braunbeck and Charles Coleman Finley, who just recently, stepped down as the editor of fantasy and science fiction. We were sitting there talking to the people and they asked us a question. They said, when do you know that your writing had moved up to a professional level? And we all told the same story. It was when we wrote our first professional sale and we all stopped about 2/3 of the way through because we knew how good it was and we didn't want to screw it up. And then we all had to go back to it and finish it. And it was really weird. I don't know how common that is. It could have just been a massive coincidence, but for me, that was Mr. Punch.
That's an amazing table to be sitting around hearing the same story. It almost makes you think that you need that to have that experience.
Yeah, I don't want people to think that though, because there's so many, people compare themselves so often to other people, and it's like, oh, well, if I didn't do X, Y, Z by the time this person did it, or it didn't happen like this person did it, they think something's wrong, and they shouldn't.
Well, especially with how quickly the industry has been changing over the last 2 decades in particular. I don't know if there is a single path forward anymore. I mean, it used to be you'd make your bones on short stories, right? Sending out those stories with the self-addressed stamped envelopes and waiting 6 to 8 months to get back a reply, and hopefully it was what you wanted to hear. And you built up enough credits, and that got you in at a small press publisher or whatever, or an agent became interested because they knew you could produce. I'm not sure any of that has the weight it used to. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think you're right, but I also think that the bad thing is that people are spread so thin because they're trying to do everything at once. So it's kind of like almost like on a mixing board where you have all the different things, and everybody's trying to push all of them at the same time. And you're human. You can only do so many things. You can only do so many blogs, so many stories, so many. If you do YouTube videos and you do a newsletter, and it's just a ton. Self-publish, hybrid publish, small press, big press, they try everything. And I think it's good to try everything to see what you may like and what may be successful for you. But I also think that writers today starting out seem a hell of a lot more stressed than it was back in my day. People were stressed trying to put food on the table after a certain point. That part was pretty tough. But, the actual working toward it, I mean, it was slower in a lot of ways, and it gave you time to work on projects in between. I mean, and not just work on them, but to settle into them, because you weren't going to get responses from people in a couple of days. Although when I first started sending out novels, I could send them out in the early 80s. It stopped real quick, but in the early 80s, I could send them and get a reply within a month or two, and I didn't have to have an agent. It was really weird. And then before too long, suddenly it was, no, we don't do unsolicited submissions anymore, and everything came the way it still is today. But so I think there's a lot of stress for people. There's also a lot of, you need to be working 24/7 all the time or something's wrong with you. It's the definition of hustle. And people seem to feel like they have to have a lot of stuff out, a lot of product out right now. And I always wonder how much learning people can do about themselves and the way they write and about the craft. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be starting out now, I don't think. Although I sometimes wonder, what would I have done? I probably would have hit, publish on a book on Amazon 30 seconds after I finished typing it. I finished my first one at 19, and I probably would have uploaded the damn thing in 3 seconds after I was done.
Well, I think, though, it depends on what your goals are with each of these things. The reason self-publishing doesn't appeal to someone like me is because my goal as a kid was one thing, and it really hasn't changed. What I want was defined a long time ago, and I'm resistant to really changing that, which might be to my detriment. But I do see way too much stuff getting published too early, and I wish the best for each one of those creators. I really do. But it does create a situation where it's harder for everyone because there's a mountain of stuff coming out at all times.
Yeah, and then people end up defaulting back to, if there are gatekeepers, the gatekeepers help. They make choices easier for you. A lot of times people, they don't think of them as gatekeepers, but they go based on what their friends say on social media. So they're like, oh, everybody's got to watch this miniseries. They run and watch it. It helps them make a choice for them. Because otherwise, you'll sit even just on damn, Prime or Netflix, you'll sit there for 3 hours doing this, and you end up going to bed because you didn't find anything to watch.
I've totally done that. Yeah. My husband and I, when we look for things to watch on Prime, we'll just go to, we'll just sift through it. And I actually have more fun just seeing his reactions to some of the movies on there and then describing them. That tends to be more entertaining than the movie itself.
It's true. I mean, reading the summaries, and, I'm older than my wife, so some of the movies that I know she just didn't see. Plus, her family just didn't let her watch a lot of movies. Anything they thought was too scary. They thought The Wizard of Oz was too scary for her, even as a teenager. So she didn't get to see a lot of those things. So, yeah, just talking about them, it becomes a fodder for conversation more than which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But, people aren't watching the movies.
Yeah, did you introduce her to a lot of different horror titles, at least film-wise?
Yeah, she's can't take movies where human beings are being cruel to other human beings, like really sadistically cruel, because it's too realistic. But if there's like CGI sharks or alligators eating people, she is just fine. It's got that distance for her at that point. So in anything super nightmarish, like in terms of imagery, because she has super vivid dreams, she'll carry it with her into her dreams, so she doesn't watch that. But yeah, I've introduced her to a lot, and a lot of things that she thought were going to be scary just because she kind of heard about them, turned out not to be scary for her. So that's kind of cool. I mean, but still, if it's horror movie night for me, she's usually not around. She doesn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I totally get that. I actually had a question about your first book. It was the Harmony Society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you inspired by the actual Harmony Society by any chance?
Accidentally. My first wife and I lived in I think it was Vincennes, Indiana. We saw it, or it might have been in Danville, Illinois. I can't remember, because we lived both places very close together. We drove by like this big, it looked like a courthouse, with the columns and every stone columns, and it said the Harmony Society on it. And I was like, oh, that seems weird. And there's no internet to check about something like that. Yeah. And so that just stuck with me. And I'm like, well, it's one thing that I saw in this one town. I'm sure it's fine. And I write this book. And then, as the internet, I did a couple internet searches in the early days and found nothing. But the early days, there wasn't much on the internet. And then, a few years later, I tried and I'm like, oh my God, it's a real thing. I hope they don't find out. I hope they're not upset. They're still around. But yeah, it was so it was accidentally based on the real thing.
Part of the collective unconscious at work again.
Right.
That's neat. So yeah, I'm looking forward to starting that one. I'm sorry, Lauren. I know I keep cutting you off.
Okay.
But it's like I haven't had a chance to I haven't had a chance to read any of your fiction, only your nonfiction with Writing in the Dark. So, I started at the most recent one, and then I saw your entire giant catalog of other things. And so it's like, maybe I'll just start at the end now, or the beginning, and then work my way into the middle somewhere.
I don't know what to tell you.
You're obviously very prolific, so.
Yeah, that's that prospect. Nobody's asked me about that, but the scariest thing about having written Writing in the Dark is now, people will judge stuff I write based on what I put in there. They'll be like, "Does he really do that?" As I was writing it, I'd be like, "Holy shit, do I do that?" Or if I'm writing like something afterwards, I'd be like, you said not to do this in your book. So it's just, it's one thing to say all these ideas you have about horror and how to make horror better. And some of the principles are, I've tested in class over years and workshops, so I feel pretty decent about them. But then it's like, if people read this or read it first before they read my fiction, and then they go to my fiction, I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to think? I don't know. It's really a strange, it's a very naked kind of feeling, but that's not a bad thing for a creative person. It's probably a really good thing to take a risk like that. But
yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to going back and reading your other pieces, because I feel like I'm getting to know you more as a person and a writer, and then kind of going back and reading your other works. I don't feel like judgy about it, if that makes sense. It's sort of like, oh, cool, I know more I have more details about, what got him to write this and why.
Right. And if people, hate my fiction, I don't care. If in terms of I do care, obviously, but not in terms of Writing in the Dark, as long as it doesn't invalidate anything in there they find useful. I wouldn't want people to just say, well, to hell with all this stuff because his book sucks. His other books suck. If they find something useful in it, that's why I wrote it. So I hope people, at least they don't get rid of that. At least they don't throw that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get to some of the questions that are starting to roll in from everyone that's not Robert Long in the chat, you're the man upstairs novella was definitely a big career moment for you. Getting nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award, and also just starting to get that buzz on a different level. At least that's what it feels like from the outside. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was. Well, it happened. It was after my divorce from my first wife, living in a small little apartment. I'd met my second wife, but we hadn't gotten married yet. And some migrant workers moved in upstairs. It was after the great big hurricane winds or whatever we had, whatever long ago that was. They blew through the whole nation up from the south and tore up all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of workers came up from Florida to do things and build things. And so they moved in upstairs and they were partying all night long. And one night I was like out there down in the living room at like 3 a.m. I kept hearing this just giant thud from upstairs. I had no idea what it was. It kept going on and on and on. And eventually I found out that the one of the men was so drunk he would walk 3 steps and fall and hurt himself. And they took him to the hospital the next day. I felt terrible. I almost called the cops, but I'm like, I don't know what they're doing. To hell with it. It's so, you know, the idea of the men upstairs came from just there were men upstairs. And around that time, I saw a woman who she was just sitting in a second-run movie theater, sitting in the lobby crying. And I just wondered what was wrong with her. And I didn't know. My wife, you know, she would go up to her. If she had been there, she would have run up to her and helped her. But I don't know. I always feel like I need to give people their privacy in public when they're like that. Plus, you know, as a guy, I would have come up and I probably would have been like a creeper. You know, if another woman had come, just the way it is in our culture, I think another woman's help would have been more welcome. But I kind of put those two things together, you know, to make that. And then just threw in some of the themes I often write about in terms of just how do you deal with entropy, the idea that everything's going to fall apart. There's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, I was surprised. I was shocked to get the little email that says, "Hey, you're nominated. Don't say anything for 3 months."
Exactly.
And I went to the convention. My second wife, still weren't married, but I consider her my wife at that point. And my daughters, who were preteens, maybe, we all went there to ReaderCon, and all they wanted to do was run around Boston. So I did none of the convention. And so when I showed up at the awards ceremony, everybody's like, "You're here?" And they were there. I didn't think I was going to win. I told them as soon as I looked at the ballot, I said, you know, Liz Hand's going to win. And she did. But it was really cool. Shirley Jackson's daughter was there, you know, and she gave a speech, and it was awesome. So yeah, it was a really cool thing.
It has to feel like some kind of validation. Just has to.
Yeah, it did. You know, and you get your little nominees rock, which is awesome. And I was an idiot. I didn't understand the symbolism of the rock. My wife had to explain it to me. She goes, you know, it's from the lottery. This is why they give you a little rock that says Shirley Jackson Awards on it. And I was like, oh my God. So I still have that, you know. She displays whatever words I get, she wants to display them, which I feel weird about. I'd like them to stay in here in my writing room, like maybe on the shelf above my head there where nobody else can see them but me. But I said, if you want to put them out there, you can. So my little Shirley Jackson rocks, I got a couple of them now. They're out there.
Awesome. So Daniel Shine, I'm going to reword his question a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about Nightmare on Elm Street Prodigy?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I got how did I get the gig? I think I don't remember. I might have just queried them, sent them a letter or something, and I already published, you know, if you're doing tie-in stuff, it helps if you published at least some of your own original fiction in novel form, because they need to know you can write a novel and finish it, and that it's fine before you can get tie-in gigs. I got the Nightmare on Elm Street gig, and I pitched a story to them. My idea was that Freddy Krueger, he tries to attack this woman young woman in the dream world, but in the dream, she dives through the dream catcher she has over her bed, lands on her bed, and then Freddy tries that, except he comes out human. It strips him of all his dream stuff, and he is literally a human in our world. And he wants to get back to the dream world, and he doesn't know how. And while he's gone, there's a power vacuum, and something takes over for him. And it was going to be the spirit of his dad, whatever his dad was. And so the studio was taking forever to approve it. And my editor, I'll never do this again, but my editor said, start writing it. We got to get writing it. So I wrote 60 pages of this damn thing. And then the studio said, nope, we can't have Freddy be a human being, because then it brings up the specter of him being a child molester in life. And we do not want to cover that. And I already had a part for that. I was going to have Freddy hanging around a playground, and the kids are like, get the hell out of here, because they're all taught about stranger danger now. It's so different than when he was a human. And that's was it. I was going to just have a little thing and then no more about it. And so then I had to hurriedly come up, like within a couple of days, for a brand new story. And I just came up with the idea of Prodigy. That, you know, Freddy's trying, people are starting to forget about him or whatever, or he wants to work through like a human, maybe the point where he could be reborn or something. And I had a lot of fun writing it. It was great to write Freddy Krueger. I also wanted to go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna be like, why didn't they hire you for the Nightmare on Elm Street remake?
I don't know. They don't ever hire writers. They don't look at book writers
unless they are getting that cycle where it's time to screw over David Shaw again, right?
Right.
That's the only case.
But I wanted to do a Jason X book for them.
Oh, that would have been
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, my idea was that a group of scientists capture Jason X and they send him back in time to kill himself before he, and then he fails like when he's little, and then they bump him forward to the next incarnation of him. Then he fails, and then they go to the next one. So I was going to have him fight like all the different incarnations of himself, and but that didn't work. They didn't. They kind of canceled the line. I was supposed to do a Final Destination book. I was starting to work on that, but they canceled the line. So that was a bummer. But at least my Freddy came out.
Listen. This is Jason X territory over here. This is an extremely pro Jason X world here. And I'll tell you what, Nancy's 2 books just rule in that line. I also love the fact that you could do anything with it. Science fiction was really just magic for that world.
Right.
So it opened it up. It allowed such imagination and such creativity that from probably the perception wise anyway, the least creative long running franchise, right? Right. But it would have opened it up. So I really wish that Jason X had done better and been well received by the audience, because I think there was something there.
Yeah, when my brother and I went to see it in the theater, the woman at the counter wouldn't sell us tickets. She said, "This movie is so bad, I will not sell you tickets to this movie." And I kept telling her, "You don't understand. This is why we're going. This is what we hope to see." So she finally made us promise that after 15 minutes, if we didn't like it, we'd come back out and she'd give us tickets to anything else. And I'm like, why would you keep me from this glory? Why would you try to do that?
Like, let me give you money. Do you not want to make your sales? Come on.
Right.
So Griffin is asking if you could name the most impressionable horror film that had the most influence in your life. I guess that's a compliment to asking you about the early horror novels.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it might be a movie. I think it was a giant spider movie in black and white, spiders running through some like small southwestern town. I think it was Earth versus the Spider, but I'm not sure. But I was watching this movie, and it was not too long after the first death in my family. It was a great uncle of mine who was in some ways like a second father, and he just died unexpectedly of a heart attack in his 40s somewhere. And I don't know how long it was afterwards, but it was after this. And then they had a scene where, because of course they didn't have any money to show the spider wreck a town, you kind of hear the noise of the spider going through the town, and then the camera pans across the destruction after it's gone. And there was a little boy in the street who was blonde and had glasses, and I wore glasses at the time, and one of his lenses shattered, and he was crying. And I realized at that moment that monsters, which I always thought were cool and I loved, that they made people feel the way I felt after my uncle died. And it changed everything for me, because I realized that the humans, maybe not in the movies, the way, they're fun ones, they don't really show that. The people are disposable. They just scream and they die. But I never lost that. And so whenever people die in my books, I always try to give them at least a little bit of humanity before they go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
MJ from Let's Talk for a Minute asks, any words of wisdom for writers who have projects or stories that they know better than the majority of projects Hollywood pushes out that are not even good?
So wisdom to do what with them?
I'm reading that that he's thinking that it's hard to navigate in a system where you have layers of people who think they know your story better than you do, or your genre better than you do.
Yeah, I've never had anything adapted by Hollywood. So in terms of trying to get your work, I mean, the best thing to do would probably be to find a lit manager, somebody that will pitch your stuff to Hollywood. From all the things I've heard from writers over the years that have worked with them, the money's nice if they take an option, but those things almost never pan out. I think I read somewhere that the difference between like Hollywood and publishing is that publishing, everything's a no until it's a yes, but in Hollywood, everything's a yes until it's a no. And so you can go so far with the yeses and you think everything's going to work out and it's so wonderful, then it all just collapses. So you kind of have to, I guess, get used to the idea that whatever you do, it's not going to be just you, unless you have all the money. I think it was Coppola who said that, might have been Coppola, who said that film would not be a true art form unless one person can do it completely, because there's too many compromises that you have to make. Indie filmmakers have to do that just because of money. They may not have to do it creatively, except for money. So to get used to the idea that whatever you do, other people are going to put their fingers all over it, and they are going to break it down and tear it apart and do all kinds of other things with it. And you are just a cog in that machine. And then if you win an Oscar, you're like, oh yeah, that's because the Writers Guild put my name on there in arbitration, but 50 other people wrote this damn thing too. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I have no interest in, I mean, I would be thrilled to death if somebody adapted anything of mine, but I would want to keep my hands off it as much as possible.
Just send the check.
It's different. Yeah, it's different. And plus, it's like, if I directed a play and then somebody else directed the same play eventually, like I'm going to go and tell them how to do it. It's theirs at that point. They're using my thing as a jumping off point for their own creativity. They should change it. I never understood why people want the book filmed. I'm like, you already read the damn book. You already have it. You should want a different version of it, so you have something else to see, or somebody else's interpretation of it. So I guess that, Hollywood will break your heart and get used to the fact that it's massive collaboration all over the place.
Yeah, even William Peter Blatty, when he adapted Legion, took liberties with his own story.
Yeah,
and then the studio took even more.
Yep. And that's what happens.
Yep. So Dan is saying he just grabbed The Mouth of the Dark, and I'm very excited to read it, as it's one of only 3 of Tim's novels I haven't read yet.
Well, it's the worst. It's the worst one. So,
are you serious? No. I'm like, I don't know if you should really promote it that way.
No. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy it, Daniel. It was a lot of fun to write. I wrote it for Sam Hain, and then Sam Hain fell apart. And then when Don landed at Flame Trem, like, do you remember this book? And he's like, no.
That's hilarious. He's also asking if you could choose one of your books for Hollywood to adapt, which would it be?
God, I don't know, because most of them they wouldn't have the budget for. I mean, they're so complicated and so many weird things happen.
Think big, to the moon.
To the moon. Probably my Necropolis books. Those 3, the 3 adventure books that are about like a zombie detective solving mysteries in a city of monsters. Because I just think it'd be really cinematic and a hell of a lot of fun. The budget would be astronomical for it. Unless they just downsize it to the point where they're using like just makeup on people and you don't have to do a lot of CGI, then you'd probably be fine.
Just, slide it in, turn it into a comic first, and then get Marvel to pick it up, and then it could be part of the MCU.
There you go.
Here's your budget.
That would be good.
There would be a lot of like silly jokes added. That would be the destiny.
I can handle that.
Tim's saying Marvel money he's okay with.
Yeah. But it'd be cool to see that on the screen.
I don't have to see it. I don't have to see it if I don't want to.
That might be the smartest thing yet.
Yeah, I don't know what I feel about it. I mean, the closest I've come is when I've done movie novelizations and then watched the movie afterwards to see what the movie turned into from what I read in the script. Because you don't always get the latest script, the last script.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time, right? It's just they need you writing while they're still putting the thing together. So
right. And sometimes it's just human error. When I was doing the novelization for Kingsman: The Golden Circle, my editor got one script and she didn't know I got a different one. And so I wrote an entire draft based on this script. And she's like, oh no, we should change it. I'm so sorry. Change it to the draft I have, which I did. And then they were like, no, this is the real script you're supposed to do. And I was like, what? And, they're very different. People are dying in one script. People are living in one script. People don't have legs at the end of one script. And then this never, ever happens with novelizations. I swear to God, it never does. But the director decided I had to be flown out to Hollywood to watch the movie early because I had to see everything in the movie and put everything in the movie in the book. And so, we had to watch it. I wasn't allowed to take a computer. I was only allowed to have a notebook. And so it took 9 hours to watch this movie because they had to stop it for me to write down everything, what everything looked like and the dialogue. And
that was going to be my next question. Again, you're just fucking beating me to it, man.
It was horrible. And I couldn't read my writing when I got home. I was jet lagged. I had 3 hours of sleep. And then when I got home, I'm like, I've got 4 different versions of this damn movie. What do I do? And I'm just like, I'm going to put it together for the parts I like. So I just put together my own version and they said, fine. And they published it that way. So it's the best parts of the various scripts, plus my seeing the movie.
That's probably the best.
Horatorium great name, by the way, says,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to someone who wants to transition from being a screenwriter to a novelist, but is afraid of letting go of the rigid structure of a script?
Well, I once heard, I don't know where, I'm terrible at remembering when I hear things, but that playwrights think of, when they think dialogue, and that fiction writers think scene, and screenwriters think image. So if you want to transition from one to the other, I mean, being able to change that way of thinking is probably a big one. The other thing to do would be, when you write a scene, you have to imagine it as if you are that one particular character, like you are playing that character, you are acting that character. Because when you write a script, at least from the 4 that I've read and novelized, they're all written as if they're a movie. I mean, they're not from anybody's point of view. There may be some indications what a character's feeling, so the actor knows. But I mean, scripts they're not a thing in and of themselves. They're a blueprint for a performance. But a book is a thing all by itself when it's done. And so you don't have anybody else to do the interpreting for you. I mean, you're the actor, you're the director, you're the cinematographer, you're the special effects department. You're everything. And trying to do all of that's super intimidating, but if you focus it all, filter it all through a viewpoint character in each individual scene, just the way you experience life, you'll be just fine. In my teach fiction writing, I'll show a YouTube video from one of the Bourne movies, and it's just Matt Damon beating the crap out of some dude in an empty apartment somewhere. And I ask people when it's done, the students, whose point of view it's from, because we see Matt Damon. Sometimes we'll see the villain only. Sometimes we'll see Matt Damon's friend who's there, and she stays out of the fight, but she's around. And they say, oh, it's Matt Damon's, or it's this. And somebody eventually would take pity on me and say, it's us. This is written from our point of view, because we experience from our point of view. We're an audience. And I say, yep, it is presented to you as a passive audience member who has to do nothing but absorb this. And I said, okay, now watch this. And then I show them a video it's a song by, I guess, Biting Elbows, called Bad Motherfucker, which you can look up on YouTube. They're the same people. Those people who did the video are the same ones who did the movie Hardcore Harry, if you've seen that. And it's the video for the song is like a James Bond adventure, kind of hyperkinetic one, but it's done as if we are the character looking out, like the camera is our eyes. And I said, this is what you want to imagine whenever you write a scene. It's how we view reality, but it freaks us the hell out whenever somebody tries to show us images like this. We can watch it from afar, but I guess it's because we know we're not that person doing those things. I don't know. But when you write, you need to imagine it that way. And so that's the biggest piece of advice I give to anybody who wants to write fiction. Since most of us probably watch tens upon tens of thousands of hours more visual media than we read, even the ones that read a lot, it's hard to get away from the influence of visual media.
Yeah, definitely get friendly with third-person restrictive, because it's the whole game at this point.
Right. And it's the thing that fiction can do that nothing else can yet. I mean, eventually some technology will, but right now there's no technology that can allow you to enter into somebody else's mind and pretend on purpose that you're them doing these things and thinking and feeling these things.
Yeah, that actually kind of reminds me of something I wanted to ask you, because, you have these really out-of-the-box ideas that are kind of, are really like a breath of fresh air for me, because just the stories themselves. And, I know, you seem like a spooky guy. I wonder why. But is there anything like maybe science or history related in real life that has influenced you in coming up with some of these ideas?
Yeah, learning about, like I mentioned, entropy earlier, somewhere in science class when I was, I don't know, junior high maybe, when I learned about the second law of thermodynamics, I was like, everything's going to wind down and there's nothing you can do about it. And I was probably not too far away from my uncle's death at that time. And I really became, for 2 years after, I was 9 when he died. So for like 2 years, I was in this existential crisis where time brought stuff to you, but it took stuff from you almost instantly. And I was having a real difficult time dealing with that. And eventually I realized that time was also your friend, because it helped you heal from things and it brought you new things. And you couldn't keep the thing, just one thing in the moment forever, because you'd never get new. And so eventually, I got out of it or whatever. But that idea of how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the fact that if, the universe, if there's no God, there's no anything, just if. And it's all just going to wind down. How do you live with that? How do you make meaning with that? What do you do with your time? And so all of that's kind of influence. I mean, it's a big theme that runs through a lot of my fiction, is just how do we make peace with that, or do we? Or how do we learn to live with that?
Yeah, and I think, when you stop to think about how small of an impact we actually have in the giant scheme of things, that can trigger an existential crisis right there for me. Like, if I'm looking up at the sky and I'm like, yeah, all those stars are already dead, and nobody's probably going to remember anything I do. I think that's why we need all the distractions. Like, we need to have the phones and the screens in front of our faces. Otherwise, we start to think about things too much.
Right. Yeah, I said not too long after 9/11 and the horror writers message board, people were like, how can we write, they're all typing, how can we write horror after this? How can you do that? And horror is supposed to be about how do you deal with real darkness? And I was responding, I said, no, it's not. Horror is about how you look at darkness indirectly, because you can't look at an eclipse directly. It'll burn your eyes out. I said in a lot of ways, also horror writers they're like rodeo clowns. We run in front of the damn bull and to kind of distract people from it. So we're like the dark clowns that we dance and caper in front of the true darkness that's behind us, in the hopes that we can distract people from it a little bit, make the darkness a little friendlier, even if it's not. I mean, we got to get through somehow.
There's stories of mortality and morality. That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
Or
we're all trying to navigate.
Halloween costume has been upgraded to rodeo clown.
That's right. Nightmare rodeo clown.
Yes.
I don't like where this is going by the end of the show.
Dark rodeo clown dinosaur.
There you go.
Wow.
Riding a dinosaur. You can ride a dinosaur.
Please dress the cats up like dinosaurs.
None of the cats are quite large enough for that.
Don't ride them. I said dress them.
Okay. So Tim, you've done a decent amount of adaptations, but I'm going to skirt that for a second. Related though, you've also written a series of books called the Ghost Tracker series with the Ghost Hunters, Jason Hawkes and Grant Wilson from the television show.
Mm-hmm.
That is an oddly specific thing. How did you get that gig, and how did that process work to try and keep their brand in mind but still tell compelling stories?
Well, I had written a lot of stories for Marty Greenberg back when he was, putting out a lot of anthologies, serving as like an editor packager for a lot of anthologies. And projects would come up sometimes like that. And they contacted me, his office contacted me and said, hey, Tim, would you like to, I don't know if audition's the word, but, be considered for this. So he said, send us something. So I sent him a couple chapters of Like Death, my first leisure novel. And I don't know, it came down to me and somebody else. I don't know who it was, but I got the gig. And so since I signed an NDA, I can tell you that officially the Ghost Hunters had input from the very beginning and worked with me all the way along and saw the manuscript and edited it. I can say unofficially that one of them in his acknowledgments said they didn't have anything to do with it, and I wrote the entire book. So I did pitch like 3 ideas. I knew they wanted kind of a series. I ended up being 2. But I pitched like 3 different ideas. They picked one, and I just went ahead and wrote it. And just to be persnickety, I made sure there were no ghosts in it. Technically, there's supernatural, supernatural entity in it, but there's no ghost. They didn't notice. Nobody cared. And then the next one, I put it into like the most haunted town in America that had like a big Halloween festival every year, and there were hundreds of ghosts in that one. I just made it about 3 friends that had like a bad paranormal experience when they were kids and they forgot about it. And then they're coming back to their like 10th high school reunion, and they're finally going to confront whatever it is and find out what it is. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, mostly I just wrote my own books and nobody seemed to care. But that's not the official word. That's a hypothetical that I'm saying from
Allegedly.
Allegedly, that's the word I want. Yeah. I did have a good conversation with them for like 40 minutes where they told me some cool stories, but in the ghost hunting stories, but other than that.
So I have to ask, because, I'm the big skeptic cynic out there. Do they know what they are, or is it a gimmick, or do they believe?
They were perfectly sincere on the phone. So, yeah, I mean, there was nothing. It would be just like they were on TV. I mean, they were like, it was more like a conversation, so they sounded more relaxed and everything. It was a conversation, but no, they didn't say, they didn't say anything like, this is all bullshit, so we don't care what you write. No, they didn't do that. They were perfectly, straightforward and seemed to believe everything that they professed to believe.
All right, so obviously your own work, you've done a lot of series. You do believe in kind of franchising off individual novels into a series if the possibility is out there. Is that something you set out to do, or is that a reality foisted on you by the business side of it?
Well, in high school, I read a lot of fantasy. That was when Terry Brooks's first Shannara novel came out, and the first Thomas Covenant book came out. They re-released Tolkien's books, so they hit a new generation. So, the late 70s to early 80s. And so just read a ton of series. Plus, my dad read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and it would be lying around the house, and I'd read all that. And so I love the idea of series. I love the idea of continuing adventures. It doesn't work too well in horror because, if somebody comes back again, you're like, oh, well.
The stakes can't be that high.
Right. But, it's the monsters can come back. I mean, I really like the Universal monsters being in different movies. And I was seeing Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman when I was 4 blew my mind because it never occurred to me they could live in the same world and meet like anybody could in the movies and TV shows. So I really love that kind of thing. I mean, in Necropolis, I wanted it to be a series, and I wanted it to be like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. It's my love letter to all the monsters like creature feature monsters and things like that. But in horror, even though especially with my Flame Tree books, I've got them connected in all kinds of little ways. Like they might be in the same town as another book. The story might be the characters don't meet. The one I'm doing now, I'm going to have one of the characters from Mouth of the Dark, maybe 2 of them, make a cameo appearance. So they all take place. I've got like a list of my Tim Wagner mythos of all the things. Some of them have never showed up in books yet. So they kind of say what the whole multiverse is doing and all that. They all come from the Harmony Society. Harmony Society is the basis for all this stuff.
That's book. Fucking rad. I didn't know that. Now I'm super excited to read that book.
Hardly anybody does. But the villain from that one shows up briefly in Darkness Wakes, one of my leisure novels, and he might show up in some other future novels, depends.
So let's do it. Let's talk leisure for just a moment.
Okay.
So when the sky started falling, how aware were you of just how bad the situation had gotten?
I was pretty much already out. I mean, I'd done 3 books. Don had warned me that because my second one, Pandora Drive, didn't sell that well, that my third one had to sell pretty well in order for them to offer me a 4th gig, and it didn't. And it was, I didn't know much about author promotion. I mean, I didn't do anything for the first 2 books. I feel so stupid about it now, but it wasn't like people talked about all that a lot. And the whole theory, the old school still was that if you have a traditional publisher, they will do all that for you. And that wasn't true then, and it's not true now. It can't be.
Oh, really not.
There's just too much to do. But so I tried to promote the 3rd one. I even tried to write the 3rd one, Darkness Wakes, so it wasn't as just, balls to the walls insane like Pandora Drive was, because that put off some readers. But it didn't matter. And so, Dom was like, sorry, we can't do a 4th one. And so when it looked early on like things were going bad, I'm like, I would like my rights back, please. And I got them back before everything fell apart. The only bad thing for me is that somehow Amazon believed it had acquired the audio rights to my books, which it didn't. And they produced audio versions, and they still sell them to this day. And I can't get anybody to tell me what's going on. I'll email the Amazon people about like audio things or whatever, or ebook things. They will get back to me as long as it's not those 3. So, if you've ever, like, if you buy anybody out there, if you buy one of the audio ones and enjoy it, that is fine. I do not care. But I don't know where those things came from, and I don't know who's getting the money for them. It's not me. So that's the only like bad leisure stuff I got. Everything else was fine at leisure.
It sounds like you did better than most. So Congratulations.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about those novelizations, and not just that, also just the licensed novels, because I mean you did the Triple X, you did Alien, and those aren't adaptations; those are original stories, correct?
Well, the Triple X was a novelization, but the Alien was original, and the Supernatural ones I've done were original.
So, how do you divide up? Like, how do you do one for the one licensed for everyone of your own, or is it just as they come in?
It's as they come in, because there has to be a project available. I mean, it's not like, editors, publishers, what they do is they will go to a studio like, the CW, if they back when they were doing Supernatural, because they're not doing it anymore now. It's over. Maybe they'll start doing some books again eventually, but not now. And so they'll say, we would like a license to publish 3 books, please. And the studio says, great, pay us this. And so then they have to go out and find writers for those things. And it's going to be writers they've probably already worked with before. And so, they'll come to you after a certain point. I mean, it takes a little while to build up that kind of reputation or whatever. And sometimes, like if a new company comes out, I mean, last year, a new one called Aconite came out. They started off doing just media tie-ins based on board games, but then they got a license to do a bunch of lower level Marvel characters. And so you can pitch for all kinds of different properties. And I'm going to be doing a novel for them based on Zombicide Invader, this card game. It's like space zombies or whatever.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that they were starting to do novelizations on board games, but I am very intrigued because we have a closet full of board games.
Yeah, they're doing a lot. It's called Aconite with a Y.
Okay.
Go look them up.
So
it's just when they come in, it would be nice to alternate just because you get more money for tie-ins than you do for small press books. So that's nice, but also it's kind of like an antidote to writing your own dark weirdness. It's even if it's dark, it's still lighter than the kind of stuff that I do, and it stretches different muscles.
Yeah, you're
muscles.
trying to get out of your head.
Yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah. Is there a particular board game that you'd want to write about?
I don't know much about board games.
Oh yeah, I mean me either.
I'm terrible.
My
terrible at games. No, I can't stand games. My family makes fun of me because I'm like, I know how they all end. Somebody wins and somebody doesn't. Who cares? And it's meaningless. Whatever you just like. I don't care about watching sports for the same reason. It doesn't matter. I like playing a sport's fine. I'd be thrilled to do that, but I don't know. I've just never liked games very much. If they're social, like card games, that can be fun because you're just having fun with your friends. But board games have too many rules I can't remember, and I don't know.
Yeah,
and no one has actually ever played Monopoly correctly anyway, right? That's the deal.
Yeah. When the kids want to bring the Monopoly out, I'm like, why do we ever buy a damn Monopoly set? All they want to do is play with the houses or whatever.
That's what it is.
They don't care about anything else.
You can get a really savage version of Uno, maybe.
That's true. That can be fun.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't grow up with my sister. There's already a very savage version of Uno.
Or Sorry. Sorry is the game that makes you lose friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sorry. So
that was bad.
Yeah. Well, so Tim, what's the next novelization you have coming out?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say yet because the publisher is not giving me permission. Doesn't mean you couldn't say, and then I would go ahead. Because which one it is. We were talking about it earlier before the show started.
So this might get abrupt. So
that's okay.
Could it be something called Halloween Kills?
It could be. Yeah.
Everybody.
I told you earlier. I haven't announced. It's been up for pre-order everywhere for several weeks now, but there's no cover yet, and so I feel kind of dumb announcing it and saying, "Oh, by the way, there's no cover." It's the end. It just doesn't seem like it's that awesome. So I've been waiting for a cover and waiting. And still there's not one. I checked right before the show, so there isn't one yet. But it was weird because I'd finished it, and actually I had COVID while I was writing it. I got COVID early in the pandemic. So I'm sitting here right where I'm sitting now in fever and chills and whatever. And, doing my wife has all kinds of health issues. So she has like an actual breathing machine for breathing treatments, which probably helped us a lot because we both had it at the same time.
Oh my God.
The editor seemed to think it turned out okay, and so the studio. So at least I wasn't hallucinating when I was writing it. I only had about 3 weeks to write it too. It was one of the ones that was just sometimes that happens with novelizations because they have to be written by the time the film comes out, in time for the book to come out. And then of course COVID came, so the film didn't come out. And so they had announced that there was a novelization, but they did not announce I wrote it. So I've been keeping my mouth shut for a year, which has been kind of fun watching people speculate about what's in the story. And they'll be like, oh, we saw this set photo. This could mean that. And I'm like, well, I know what it means in the script I read, but I can't tell you.
But you can't say a thing.
Nope.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on here and spieling with us tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
You are one of those guys that have been a guidepost, alongside the road for so long, for so many of us. And I think that I've said it before, but we live in a world where the kind of major media is only interested in talking about Stephen King when the word horror gets used. But there's a lot of people that are working in the trenches all the time. And I'm glad we got to give a little bit of a spotlight for you today, because you're more than deserving. And best of luck on everything that comes next.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. We will be back shortly. We haven't announced the new slate of shows, but hang on. It's about to get pretty crazy. Anything you need to say, Sam?
No. No,
Right.
I'm good. I'm actually good this time.
Good night, all.
Bye, guys.
If that ends up anywhere else, I'm getting pissed.